The perfect storm. The marble steps of the Manhattan courthouse gleamed like ice under the harsh November sun, each surface reflecting the chaos of flashing cameras and shouting reporters. A sea of microphones thrust forward like weapons, all aimed at the figure emerging from the black sedan that had just pulled up to the curb. She stepped out slowly, deliberately, a vision in red that commanded immediate silence from the frenzied crowd. Her name was Sophia Chen, and at 26, she possessed the kind of ethereal beauty that could stop traffic and break marriages. Her flowing auburn hair caught the light like liquid fire, and her emerald eyes sparkled with the confidence of a woman who believed she was about to inherit the world. But it wasn't just her beauty that had captured the attention of every camera lens present. It was the gentle curve of her belly, barely visible beneath her designer coat, a curve that told a story of passion, betrayal, and the promise of new life growing within. Sophia had been waiting outside this courthouse for 3 hours, her manicured fingers constantly adjusting the Hermes scarf around her neck, her eyes fixed on the heavy oak doors that would soon reveal her destiny. She was the mistress, the other woman who had captured the heart and fortune of one of America's most powerful men, and today she was certain would be the day she stepped out of the shadows and into the light as the new Mrs. Marcus Blackstone. Marcus Blackstone. Even his name carried weight in the corridors of power. At 52, he was the king of a financial empire that stretched across 3 continents. Blackstone Global Holdings wasn't just a company, it was a force of nature, a machine that turned dreams into gold and transformed ambitious young men into legends. Forbes had ranked him among the top 10 wealthiest men in America for 7 consecutive years, with a net worth that fluctuated between $12 and $15 billion depending on the markets. But behind the glossy magazine covers and the carefully orchestrated public appearances, Marcus Blackstone was a man divided. For 28 years he had been married to Elena Blackstone, the woman who had stood by his side through the lean years when his company was nothing more than a dream sketched on napkins in a small Brooklyn apartment. Elena had been his anchor, his silent partner in building an empire. She had hosted the dinner parties that secured million-dollar deals, charmed the investors who funded his expansions, and sacrificed her own dreams to nurture his. She had given him 2 children, twins named Alexander and Gabrielle, now 25, and making their own marks on the world. But somewhere along the way, in the intoxicating rush of success and power, Marcus had lost sight of the woman who had helped him reach the summit. Elena, once vibrant and full of laughter, had become a fixture in his life, elegant, efficient, and utterly predictable. She managed their social calendar with military precision, oversaw their multiple homes with an eagle eye for detail, and presented the perfect image of a billionaire's wife at every charity gala and business function. The problem was that Marcus no longer saw her as a woman. She had become part of the infrastructure of his success, as essential and as invisible as the marble floors of their Fifth Avenue penthouse. That's when Sophia had entered his world like a hurricane in a designer dress. They had met 18 months ago at an art gallery opening in Soho. Marcus had been there reluctantly, dragging himself away from a board meeting to fulfill a social obligation. Elena had been in Switzerland at the time, overseeing the renovation of their ski chalet, managing yet another aspect of their complicated life. Sophia had been standing before a painting, a violent explosion of color and emotion that seemed to mirror something wild within her. She was the gallery owner's assistant, passionate about art, alive with ambition and utterly unimpressed by his wealth. When Marcus approached her, expecting the usual fawning attention he received from young women, Sophia had looked at him with those piercing green eyes and said, "You look like a man who's forgotten how to feel anything real." The words had hit him like a physical blow. In a single sentence, this stunning young woman had articulated something he hadn't even admitted to himself. He was successful beyond his wildest dreams, but he felt empty, mechanical, going through the motions of a life that no longer excited him. Their affair had begun that very night. What started as stolen hours in hotel rooms had evolved into something deeper, more dangerous. Sophia didn't want his money, at least not at first. She wanted his attention, his passion, his devotion. She made him feel young again, alive again, like the hungry entrepreneur he had once been instead of the cold corporate machine he had become. Marcus had tried to resist. He really had, but Sophia was like a drug, and he found himself addicted to the way she made him feel. She challenged him intellectually, surprised him constantly, and brought back the excitement that had been missing from his life for so long. The pregnancy had changed everything. When Sophia had told him the news 3 months ago, Marcus had felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration that reminded him of the early days of building his company. Here was proof of their love, growing inside the woman who had awakened his heart. But it was also the catalyst that would destroy his carefully constructed world. Elena had found out about the affair in the most mundane way possible. A credit card statement showing charges at restaurants she'd never been to, hotels she'd never seen. The confrontation had been civil, almost businesslike. Elena had simply walked into his study one evening, placed the statements on his desk and said, "I know about her, Marcus. We need to talk." The conversation that followed would haunt Marcus for the rest of his life. Elena hadn't screamed or cried or thrown things. She had simply sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap, and listened as he stumbled through his confession. When he finished, she had asked only one question. "Do you love her?" "Yes," he had whispered, the word feeling like both a liberation and a death sentence. Elena had nodded, stood up, and walked toward the door. Then she had paused and turned back to him. "Marcus," she had said, her voice steady as granite, "you have no idea what you've just unleashed." The divorce papers had been served 3 weeks later. Now, as Sophia waited outside the courthouse, she believed she understood what was happening inside those oak doors. The proceedings were a formality, a legal dissolution of a marriage that had died years ago. Marcus had assured her that Elena would be generous. After all, she had been well provided for throughout their marriage, and she would receive a substantial settlement. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of her life, but not enough to seriously damage his empire. What Sophia didn't know was that Elena Blackstone had spent the last 6 months quietly assembling a team of the most ruthless and brilliant legal minds in the country. She hadn't just hired divorce attorneys. She had recruited a small army of forensic accountants, private investigators, and corporate lawyers who specialized in untangling complex financial structures. And deep in the bowels of a nondescript office building in Queens, a mild-mannered man named Robert Chen, no relation to Sophia despite sharing her surname, had been working 16-hour days for months, following a paper trail that would change everything. Robert was Elena's secret weapon, a forensic accountant whose unassuming appearance masked one of the most brilliant financial minds of his generation. Elena had met him years ago at a charity function, and she had remembered his quiet confidence when he had mentioned his work exposing corporate fraud. Now, as she sat in the courthouse listening to Marcus's lawyers paint her as a gold-digging wife seeking an unreasonable settlement, Robert was putting the finishing touches on a discovery that would shake the foundations of Marcus Blackstone's empire. Inside the courthouse, Marcus felt confident. His legal team had done their work well, creating a narrative of a woman who had enjoyed a life of luxury and was now seeking to destroy him out of spite. They had carefully structured his assets, moving money through a complex web of offshore accounts and shell corporations that would be nearly impossible to trace. The prenuptial agreement Elena had signed 28 years ago would limit her settlement to a few $1,000,000 and their primary residence. But Marcus had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated the woman he had lived with for nearly 3 decades. He saw Elena as the same trusting, loving woman who had signed that prenuptial agreement when she was 22 years old and desperately in love. He didn't see the steel that had been forged in the fires of building an empire, the intelligence that had been sharpened by years of managing complex business and social relationships. As the afternoon wore on, Sophia's confidence began to waver. The proceedings were taking much longer than expected, and Marcus's lawyer had looked increasingly uncomfortable each time he emerged from the courtroom for brief conversations with his client. The reporters, initially focused on Sophia and her obvious pregnancy, began to sense that something unexpected was happening inside. Veteran court watchers knew that simple divorce proceedings didn't usually require this much time. or generate this level of tension among the legal teams. As the sun began to set over Manhattan, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps, the oak doors finally began to open. Sophia straightened her coat, adjusted her scarf one final time, and prepared to walk into her new life as the wife of one of the world's most powerful men. But the figure who emerged from those doors wasn't Marcus Blackstone. It was Elena, and the expression on her face wasn't that of a defeated woman walking away from the wreckage of her marriage. It was the smile of a warrior who had just won the battle of her life. The crowd fell silent as Elena descended the courthouse steps, her silver hair gleaming like a crown, her simple black dress making her look like a queen in mourning for her enemies. In her hand she carried a single manila folder, a folder that contained documents that would redefine the meaning of revenge. As she reached the bottom of the steps, Elena paused and looked directly at Sophia. The two women locked eyes across the crowd of reporters and cameras, and in that moment Sophia felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the November wind. Elena's smile widened, and she held up the manila folder for all to see. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent crowd, "I have something I think you'll find very interesting." The storm was about to break, and Sophia Chen, the woman who thought she was about to inherit an empire, was about to learn that she had severely underestimated the power of a wife scorned. The web of deception unravels. The manila folder in Elena's hands seemed to glow under the courthouse lights, its contents promising to shatter the carefully constructed world that Marcus Blackstone had built over decades. As the crowd of reporters pressed closer, their cameras clicking like hungry insects, Elena savored the moment she had been planning for 6 months. "What you're about to hear," Elena announced, her voice cutting through the November air with surgical precision, "is the true story of Marcus Blackstone's empire. Not the fairy tale he sold to the world, but the criminal enterprise he's been running behind closed doors." Sophia felt her knees go weak. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. Marcus had assured her that Elena would walk away quietly, grateful for whatever settlement his lawyers deemed appropriate. The confident smile that had graced Sophia's lips all day began to fade as she watched Elena command the attention of every person on those courthouse steps. Inside the courthouse, Marcus Blackstone sat in stunned silence as his legal team scrambled to process what had just occurred. The trial had been a massacre, a systematic dismantling of everything he thought he had hidden from the world. Elena's lawyer, a razor-sharp woman named Catherine Walsh, who was known for destroying billionaires in divorce court, had presented evidence that read like a crime thriller. It had started 3 hours earlier when Catherine had called her first witness, Robert Chen, the unassuming forensic accountant who had been quietly building Elena's case from his cluttered office in Queens. Robert had walked to the witness stand carrying a briefcase that contained the financial equivalent of a nuclear bomb. For the next hour, he had methodically laid out a web of deception so complex and so audacious that even the judge had to ask for clarification several times. "Your Honor," Robert had said in his quiet, methodical voice, "what we have here is one of the most sophisticated financial fraud schemes I've encountered in 20 years of forensic accounting. Mr. Blackstone hasn't just hidden assets from his wife. He's been running a criminal enterprise that involves money laundering, tax evasion, and securities fraud on a massive scale." Marcus had felt the blood drain from his face as Robert began displaying chart after chart on the courtroom's projection screen. Each diagram showed money flowing from Blackstone Global Holdings into a maze of shell companies, offshore accounts, and phantom corporations that existed only on paper. The scheme was breathtaking in its complexity. Marcus had been systematically siphoning money from his own company for over a decade, funneling billions of dollars through a network of entities with innocuous names like Meridian Holdings and Pacific Investments. The money would disappear into accounts in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Luxembourg, only to reappear months later as consulting fees or licensing agreements that bore no resemblance to actual business transactions. But the financial fraud was only the beginning. Catherine Walsh had then called her second witness, Detective Maria Santos of the NYPD's Financial Crimes Unit. Detective Santos had been investigating Blackstone Global Holdings for 18 months, following a trail that had started with suspicious activity reports filed by several major banks. "We discovered," Detective Santos testified, "that Mr. Blackstone has been using his legitimate business operations as a front for an extensive money laundering operation. Drug cartels, arms dealers, and human trafficking organizations have been using Blackstone Global Holdings to clean their money, paying substantial fees for the service." The courtroom had erupted in gasps and whispers. Marcus had tried to maintain his composure, but sweat was now beading on his forehead as he watched his carefully constructed image crumble in real time. Detective Santos had continued her testimony with the cold efficiency of a professional who had seen too much corruption to be surprised by anything. She had detailed how Marcus's consulting business had been accepting payments from organizations with ties to international crime syndicates, helping them move dirty money through legitimate financial channels. "The amounts are staggering," Detective Santos had said, consulting her notes. "Over the past 5 years alone, we estimate that Mr. Blackstone has laundered over $2 billion in illegal proceeds." But Catherine Walsh wasn't finished destroying Marcus Blackstone's life. Her third witness was the one that would seal his fate: Amanda Foster, Marcus's former executive assistant of 8 years. Amanda had worked closely with Marcus during the height of his criminal activities, and she had kept meticulous records of everything she had witnessed. More importantly, she had kept copies of emails, phone recordings, and documents that proved Marcus's direct involvement in every aspect of the scheme. "I knew something was wrong," Amanda had testified, her voice shaking slightly as she faced her former boss across the courtroom. "Mr. Blackstone would have meetings with people who didn't seem like normal business contacts, men who paid in cash, who never provided business cards, who spoke in code about cleaning services and special projects." Amanda had produced a recording that made Marcus's blood run cold. It was a phone conversation from 8 months ago, captured by the recording system that was standard in all of Blackstone Global Holdings offices. In the recording, Marcus could be heard negotiating with someone identified only as Victor about moving $50 million through a series of real estate transactions. "Victor, my friend," Marcus's voice had echoed through the courtroom. "You know I take care of my special clients. 50 million dirty becomes 50 million clean, minus my 20% fee. The properties in Miami will handle the first 25 million, and I'll run the rest through the art acquisitions." The recording had continued for another 10 minutes, with Marcus casually discussing the mechanics of laundering money as if he were talking about the weather. He had mentioned specific bank accounts, transfer protocols, and even joked about how easy it was to fool federal investigators. But the most damning evidence was yet to come. Catherine Walsh had saved the best for last. Her final piece of evidence was a series of financial documents that showed how Marcus had been using his affair with Sophia Chen to further his criminal activities. The art gallery where Marcus had first met Sophia wasn't just a meeting place for their romance. It was a sophisticated money laundering front. Marcus had been purchasing artwork at artificially inflated prices, using dirty money to buy paintings and sculptures that were then donated to museums for massive tax deductions. Sophia, according to the evidence, wasn't just Marcus's mistress. She was his partner in crime. The gallery records showed that Sophia had been actively involved in the scheme, helping to create false provenance documents for artwork, arranging sham appraisals that inflated values by thousands of %, and even personally delivering payments to clients who were later identified as members of international crime syndicates. As this revelation was presented to the court, Marcus had turned to look at Sophia through the courtroom windows. She was still outside, still waiting confidently for her new life to begin, completely unaware that she was about to be arrested as a co-conspirator in one of the largest money laundering operations in U.S. history. The final twist had come when Catherine Walsh revealed how Elena had discovered the truth about her husband's activities. Mrs. Blackstone didn't just stumble upon evidence of an affair, Catherine had explained to the court. 6 months ago, she received a phone call from Amanda Foster, Mr. Blackstone's former assistant. Ms. Foster had been struggling with her conscience about what she had witnessed, and she decided to come forward. Elena had spent months working with federal investigators, wearing recording devices to family dinners and social events, gathering evidence that would not only destroy Marcus in divorce court but also send him to federal prison for the rest of his life. The mistress who had waited outside the courthouse expecting to inherit an empire was now facing 25 years in federal prison. The billionaire who had thought he was untouchable was about to learn what justice looked like from the inside of a prison cell. And Elena Blackstone, the woman who had been dismissed as just another trophy wife, had walked away with not just 70% of a fortune, but with something far more valuable: the knowledge that she had brought down one of the most dangerous criminals in America. The perfect storm had finally broken, and when the dust settled, only one person was left standing.